So we're going to do a slideshow on that, and then we're going to, if we have time, I have other stuff because I hate running out of stuff before I run out of time. Okay, let's go. Cheers. Okay, so for whatever reason, when they did this, they started it out with a little quiz. So I thought, well, it's only 3 questions. I could do them too. See if you guys know. Okay, number 1, do seller disclosures give buyers a right to cancel?
Yes.
Of course they do, right? Because it depends on what's in the disclosures.
Sure.
Question 2, does discovery of new material facts give buyers a right to cancel?
Yes.
And the answer is yes to that. And I kind of always thought, though, that if the buyer discovers the new material fact by themselves without the seller disclosing it, something the seller didn't know, that doesn't happen. So I kind of thought maybe they'd put, it depends, but
No, definitely the other way.
But for the most part, yeah, new material facts. Okay. Does a liquidated damage clause allow sellers to keep buyer's deposit if buyer cancels? Okay, and that's the big, it depends.
Yeah.
It depends on if they cancel for, based on a contingency or just cancel because they wanted to. And that's the kind of stuff we're going to look at. Okay, I don't know the answer to this one, so I'm going to, I don't know if most unresolved deposit disputes go to mediation, but I'm kind of assuming that because they don't always use it's depend as a choice, that maybe that's the answer. But I don't know. And I don't know if I can look that up, but I don't know. Okay. Okay. So basically the first step is telling you that it's okay that if you don't, for you to say, I don't know how the deposit's going to come out. So this is the paragraph in the RPA that talks about effective cancellation on deposits. Okay. And note at the bottom, neither agents nor escrow holder are qualified to provide any opinion on whether either party has acted in good faith or which party is entitled to the deposited funds. Buyer and seller are to seek advice of a qualified real estate attorney regarding this matter. So obviously there's a lot of things that are in the contract and that Carr says that we do give advice on sometimes. So, but you need to make sure that you understand all the issues before you give that advice. And because there's a lot of like little stuff that if you just say, well, yeah, if the buyer cancels, you get the deposit, they get their deposit back, or you get to keep their deposit, but that's not really true. Even if the seller cancels based on the buyer not removing a contingency, the buyer per contract is still entitled to their deposit. So we're going to go through some scenarios. Okay. Okay. Buyer makes offer with no contingencies, 30-day escrow. Seller gives TDS and other disclosures on day 7. Interest rate increase. Okay. No contingencies. Interest rates increase on day 10. Buyer gives written notice of cancellation on day 17. Buyer demands return of deposit. Okay, and this chart tells you what all the choices are. But first, let's talk about, I don't know, it must be in the lecture they told you what the answer was. But when you talk about these facts, okay, so there's no contingency. So the buyer has contingency-wise no right to cancel. However, the law says that until 5 days after you've received the TDS, the 5 documents, the fire hardening one, I don't know, there are 5. And until 5 days after you receive those, buyer, you can cancel and get your deposit back. So it doesn't matter if you have any contingencies. If you get the TDS on day 7, you have till day 12 to cancel. Okay, and you'll notice in this one, the interest rates went up and they waited till day 17. Well, they have no contingencies. Their 5 days from getting the TDS is over and they canceled on 17. So technically, buyer is not entitled to the return of the deposit, but of course, buyer demands it. Okay, so the choices.
Excuse me, you
Yes.
just mentioned something. You used the example of interest rates go up, but if interest rates were not mentioned in the contract, is that a right?
No, I think what they were trying to say, they're trying to get at is that you get 5 days for the TDS, and is that within the 5, just because they went up, that they're not saying that they have an out because of interest rates.
Oh,
But,
okay.
but say there's nothing, no contingencies, nothing about interest rates, and you give the TDS on day 7,
Understood.
they have till day 12, it doesn't matter, right? So in this
Okay.
case, I don't think that's why I don't think the buyer would get their deposit back in this case, because there was nothing. Right, I think that was a red herring when interest rates went up. That was a red herring in here.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so no litigation risk, you agree, you sign the form, you move on, you give them their deposit back. Okay, obviously no one's suing anyone. Okay, moderate litigation risk. Seller can refuse to sign it and put the property back on the market and sell it to someone else, right? Because the buyer has canceled the contract and the seller doesn't have to agree with that. Okay. Seller can refuse to sign buyer's cancellation, send buyer a new cancellation asking for release of deposit to seller or a split of deposit. You know, gee, let's split the deposit, whatever you want to do. They're saying that has no litigation risk. And also, I don't know what the difference between moderate and little is. But little litigation risk is seller can send buyer a new cancellation, ask for a release or some of the deposit. If buyer doesn't sign, seller can wait to day 27. Oh, deliver seller, then deliver CC on day 31 later. What's the demand to close? Seller can wait 27. Oh, and they could just wait and use a demand to close instead of doing this. But that doesn't make sense either. Okay. So those are your choices. When you have a seller who gets a cancellation from the buyer, we of course determine who, per the contract, who should get the deposit. And in this case, it should be the seller. And so these are the seller's choices. Okay. Scenario 2. Buyer makes offer with all contingencies. 30-day escrow. Seller gives TDS, same thing, day 7. Buyer removes loan, appraisal, and investigation contingency on day 17. Interest rates increase on day 18. Buyer gives written notice of cancellation on day 19 and demands return of buyer's deposit. Well, if buyer has removed all their contingencies, then there is no contingency for interest rate. There's no contingency for anyone, and buyer has breached the contract. Okay, so seller should get the deposit. Buyer canceled without any contractual reason to cancel. But again, seller, I think it's the same choices from above. They can agree, they can refuse and put it back on the market. They can refuse to sign and send their own saying we should get the deposit, or the same thing, or they could send a new one asking for some or all of the deposit. So it's the same ones from above. So again, that's because we have the same issue. The seller is legally entitled to the deposit, although we don't have an opinion on that. Their sellers, you know, by the contract, they're legally entitled, and so they have to decide which one of these things do you want to do. Okay, and okay, now we're into scenario 3. Buyer makes offer with all contingencies, 30-day escrow, TDS delivered on day 7, interest rates increase on day 10. No contingencies removed. Buyer gives written notice of cancellation on day 17. Buyer demands return of deposit. Okay, I mean, it depends on what they put on their cancellation, but assuming that they have no contingencies removed, so all they have to do is say per paragraph, whatever they say now instead of 14, what we used to say per paragraph 14. That's all you have to say, and you should get the deposit back. So here we go. Seller can agree, right? And then this is their recommendation. Any other action or demand by seller is a litigation risk. The buyer is entitled to the deposit, and if seller doesn't release the deposit, it's a litigation risk. And deposits are getting bigger, so we're no longer, when I first started here, it was always, we'll go to small claims court. Well, deposits are getting bigger than small claims court, so it's not really a small claims court issue anymore. Okay, scenario 4. Buyer makes offer with no contingencies, 30-day escrow. Seller gives TDS and other disclosures on day 7. Interest rate increases on day 10, no contingencies. Buyer gives written notice of cancellation on day 12. Okay, so now buyer is entitled to cancel within 5 days of getting the TDS. And so they have a right to cancel on day 12. And they return the deposit back. Once again, same thing. They can agree and move on. Any other action or demand. If the TDS delivered by mail or email has 5 days to cancel, statute does not have good faith requirement. So we're good, right? So the buyer gets their deposit back and, you know, the seller doesn't give it back. Same thing again, it's a potential risk. Okay, scenario 5, buyer makes offer with all contingencies, 30-day escrow. Seller gives TDS on day 7, interest rate increases on day 10. On day 14, buyer's agent asks for more time to remove contingencies or the return of the deposit. I've never actually heard somebody saying that either. Can you give me more time or give me my deposit back? Maybe they do and I just don't hear about it. But anyway, so the question is what does the seller have? What can the seller do? Okay, so the seller has all their contingencies. Okay, day 14, buyer asks for more time. They have all their contingencies. They don't tell us. I assume they're assuming it's a 17-day contingency period because they don't tell you how long it is. So on day 14, they say, I don't want to remove my contingencies. What can the seller do? Okay. So the seller can agree to more time and hope for the best, right? Just give them a ETA. Seller can agree to return the deposit and mutually cancel. That would be no risk. Seller can deliver a notice to perform on day 15. So they ask for more time on 14, the response being a notice to perform on day 15, because you can only send it 2 days before the last day. So if you send on the 15th, the last day is still the 17th day. So they can send that, and on the 18th day, if they don't remove their contingencies, they can cancel. I noticed they didn't put a litigation risk on that one, and I'm not sure why. Okay, seller agrees to return the deposit. Obviously, they could do that. Seller demands release of the deposit and wants to get the deposit themselves. So the seller has a choice here. They can give them more time, or they can say, nope, I'm sorry, I have a great backup offer, and I'm going to give you a notice to perform. And if you can't remove your contingencies, then we're going to go forward with somebody else. But that's, you know, people call about that. Can they do that? Well, yeah, they can do that. And it's usually us that's doing it, but yeah. Okay, so those are the scenarios. Then they go into some cancellation strategies. Okay, seller wants to cancel. You're the listing agent. 4 days into escrow, your seller says, I don't want to sell anymore. Find me a way out. Right? We've all had that, or I assume all of you, not me, but all of you have had that. Okay. First, ask the buyer's agent nicely. What if buyer wants to cancel too? So you could do, so this is new, and I don't wonder if someone went to this class because I saw this for the first time this week. There's a little box down here. I don't know if it's always been here. Proposed mutual cancellation. I've never seen anyone check that till this week. We got one of these and it was checked. And basically what that says is that we're not really canceling unless it's mutual and the seller signs too. And if both parties don't sign the top, there's no cancellation of the contract. Because it's either mutual or it's nothing. So I guess that's what, if your choice was either give me my money back, which means sign this and we'll mutually cancel, or the seller doesn't want to, then there's no cancellation. The buyer's going to have to unilaterally cancel if they want to cancel. So anyway, I'm sure this has been here forever. No one's ever used it, but it's new, but it takes 2 people to cancel. So the only time you would use it is if you had a buyer who really had no right to cancel. And so they wanted the seller to call it mutual. I don't know how often that happens. Okay. Same thing. Strategy. First, the buyer's agent. Next, calculate contract. Oh, they keep putting these things in here. Okay. Contract deadlines. Issue your notice to performs and your demand to close as soon as you can, okay, which on a notice to perform is 2 days before the action. So again, if it's 17 days on day 15, you can send your notice to perform so that they don't get an extra any days. It's the 17th and that's it, the 17th day. Demand to close is 3 days. So you can send a demand to close 3 days before the close of escrow because it's a 3-day notice.
Are there any specific days of the week that you cannot deliver these?
Okay, I know, but every day, again, every day counts, but the last day can't be a weekend.
Okay.
So if you send a notice to buyer to perform on a Friday or a Saturday, it's the same thing. And on either Thursday, Friday, or Saturday, it's all the same. They get Monday.
Okay.
right? It's just how it works. Demand to close, same thing, but it's 3 days. But that's how you turn up the heat. You want you want to get rid of them because you really don't want to sell. You try to put them in default. Okay, cancellation of the contract, or you just cancel the contract. Oh, no, they're saying basically if they don't remove their contingencies, then you could cancel the contract. You would check buyer has failed to remove the applicable contingencies, and then you would cancel. Okay. Okay, bloopers, things you shouldn't do. Okay. Took me a while to pick this one up. Okay. So the reason I do this, we don't like this one, is it says, doesn't take this specific action as follows. What was wrong with this? There's something wrong with this. It took me forever to figure it out.
Oh, yeah.
Do you see it?
Yeah. Well, what happened was
Make it bigger.
they checked off, they remove all the contingencies, but the seller hasn't delivered all the disclosures at that time, and they've
Oh,
already.
did I miss that? Oh, over here. Okay, that I knew
Yeah.
I knew I figured it out. Right. So you can't, you know, if you haven't delivered all your disclosures, they're still going to get, well, and again, I always thought you could do this, but if the buyer removed their contingencies and then got a disclosure, they had another 5 days. So that's what I always thought, is that the only difference is that you get 5 more days. Now, if the buyer, even if the buyer doesn't have the TDS yet, I mean, you still, nothing you can do on here is going to change the law on the TDS. That's a law. So anyway, that's what I always thought, that you could do that, but I guess not. Okay. Okay, so this one was easy. This one, they did a notice to buyer to perform, and I just saw one of these, so we do it too. Close escrow, because it's not a choice on this form, because it's not the right form. Okay, for closing escrow, you need a demand to close, not a notice to perform. So it would be ineffective. Okay, so this is what it should look like. Okay, seller unilaterally canceling. The seller cancels. The other party has been given a notice to, whatever it is, has failed to give a notice to perform, whichever one you check, but that's how it should look on the top part. Now, we know the cancellation is 2 parts. This is the top part. And somewhere down here, we're going to get to the bottom part. Okay. Okay, so now you represent the buyer, and the buyer says, I don't want to buy anymore. Give me my deposit back. Okay. And again, you could blow this for the buyer. If the buyer comes to you and says, no reason, I just don't like it, or I think I paid too much, or something, that is not a contingency. And you put that reason down, the buyer's probably not going to get their deposit back. Okay. So you have to protect your buyer by making sure that you are canceling based on a right buyer has to cancel. So even though the buyer told you, I'm canceling because I changed my mind and I'm moving to Texas, you can't put that on here, or the buyer loses their deposit. But if the buyer has any kind of contingency that they can use, especially a contingency for an inspection contingency, that's anything. Yeah, I don't like this house. It's not in Texas. I changed my mind. You're allowed to do that. Okay. So it depends.
Cindy, I have a question.
Yeah.
So are you saying that, let's say, for instance, the buyer wrote the offer, there was an acceptance, and for any other reason within the contingency timeline, the buyer says, you know what, I drove around in the neighborhood in the evening and I found out that this is not a good fit for me. Are you actually saying that because it's not a contingency, does that mean that the buyer cannot cancel? Or cannot?
That is a contingency. Just liking the property, the location, everything about that's an inspection contingency. All of that.
Okay.
Right. So that's all part of your inspection contingency. So if you drive around the neighborhood and you decide, I don't want to buy this while you have your inspection contingency, you're canceling. I assume that's right. I haven't checked it. 14D3 is the.
No, but they didn't do an inspection. They just didn't like at night that they didn't like the neighborhood.
But that's the whole idea of investigation, of your period of, it's not just the house, it's the neighborhood, the school, it's everything.
Got it. Okay. Okay. Understood. Thank you.
Okay, what if buyer already removed all contingencies? Okay, and then we're going to do this one that they talked about above, that you do this, basically saying, I know I removed it, but can we make this mutual and give me my deposit back? It's a shot, right? It's better than saying, you know, sorry, buyer removed all their contingencies and they're moving to Texas, give us our deposit back. Okay. Okay, so to protect your buyer and your buyer's deposit, first of all, of course, ask for an extension of time, offer to compensate seller if you need to. Gee, we need an extension. We'll, you know, the usual, we'll release 5,000 of our deposit, or we'll give you a per diem, whatever it is. And then I just went over this with someone today. If the buyer still has a cancellation right, then cancel. I got asked today, the buyer has a notice to perform that has to be, and all their contingencies have to be removed tonight by the end of day today or whatever it is. And they don't wanna remove them yet. But they could lose their deposit. And then there's also a demand to close for Monday. So if the seller waits till Monday and they don't close, they cancel based on the demand to close, buyer's gonna lose their deposit. So you might as well call them and ask for an extension. And if the answer is no, we have a much higher offer, we want you out, then cancel while you still have your contingency today. Because if you're not going to remove it today and you're not, or maybe you are, but you know you can't close Monday, you're going to take the chance of losing your deposit if you don't just cancel today. So, and you know, so that's kind of what they're saying. So, okay, pitfalls of cancellations. Checking this box is permitted by the good faith exercise of what? I don't know. You know, you get a picky seller and they come back and they go, nope, that's not a good reason to cancel. There, you didn't give a reason, so I get the deposit, right? You didn't blame it. You didn't blame anything. Okay. I don't know. I've never seen anybody take advantage of this, but it could happen. Okay. Oh, okay. So here's the one. Buyer tells you that they changed their mind. Nothing. The property's great, but I just changed my mind. And you go and you say, buyer's canceling. Buyer changed his mind. Okay. Well, this buyer is not going to get his deposit back unless, again, a seller just doesn't really care why. But the buyer would not be. There's nothing in the contract that gives the buyer the right to just change his mind. Okay.
Even if they're within the inspection period?
Just change my mind is not, I don't approve of the condition of the property. Right? I mean, you can just change your mind because you don't approve of the condition of the property, but you got to say that. If you're protecting this buyer, you've got to say per paragraph, whatever, or per inspection contingency, not just, you know, I'm moving to Texas or I changed my mind. It's just not it's not going to protect you.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay, so this part is the second part. Now, remember the cancellation's two parts, and this is the bottom part. And it's the release of escrow. So this is the blooper because as you see, there's nothing checked. Who gets the deposit? You filled all this out, but you didn't check anything. Okay, so that is that. Does anyone have any cancellation questions? Any questions on this at all?
Well, is there still in the old contract, there used to be that $1,000 or $1,500 fine if one of the parties didn't respond in time when this was going back and forth? Do they still have that?
There used to be something in the old contract that said that if one party wouldn't sign, the other party could send escrow a notice, and escrow would give the other party 30 days. And if they did, or 20, I think it was, they didn't object, then escrow could release the deposit. But they took that out of the new contract.
Okay.
But I don't know. I don't know anything about that part. Okay, so quickly, we have like 5 minutes. I want to show you just one thing I found on, can I make this bigger? Oh, not this one. This one. I found this on CAR, and it's very interesting. It is really, and it was just updated September, somewhere up here it says yesterday, September 27th, it was revised. This is a timeline based on the new contract of, you know, when things are, you know, so that if you wanted to know, or you wanted to keep track, you could, you know, you could keep this. It goes through just all the actions that people have to take, what has to be done, buyer actions, seller actions. And so it's kind of a good outline if you're looking for an outline to show a client about, you know, what happens now. We're in escrow now, what happens. we're trying to put together an escrow from the escrow perspective and now what happens, but this is a transactional. I don't know if people are already using stuff like this, but I thought it was good because if I was a buyer or seller, I could just look at this and I go, oh yeah, okay, so this happens and this happens and this is what we have.
Where did you go on that one? Cindy?
What?
Well, how did you get there?
It's on CAR. It's called Timeline of Events.
Oh, okay, got it. Okay.
I didn't know if I could copy it, if I copied the chart. Sometimes that doesn't work for me. So anyway, I just wanted to show you that because I thought it was, and we're talking about this for escrow, and then I saw this and I thought, well, this is really good. You have to put your deposit in, and this is, I probably could be streamlined a little bit for a client.
Cindy,
So,
what
yeah.
if you give the TDS during the negotiations?
That it's done. It says if they get the TDS prior to entering into the contract, or actually the law says if they get the TDS after entering into the contract, you get the extra 5 days.
Right.
Well, if you give it's the TDS, it's not the SPQ. For whatever reason, that's contractual and not legal. The fire hardening, only if you're required. Some people, most people aren't in a high fire area. The lead-based paint, if you're required, that's I always get that mixed up, so I don't want to say it out loud. And wait a minute, and and the other one is the avid of the seller's agent. Okay, so if I look at these files, sometimes I audit files in this, and they're about to close, and we don't have the avid from the seller's agent yet. The buyer can cancel until 5 days after they receive that avid. Okay. The buyer's avid, agent's avid does not count. The buyer can't, do it on purpose. Otherwise, the buyer agent could just give it late. But the seller's agent avid is one of the 5 documents, and the other one is the NHD. So if you give those documents to a buyer, like in a counteroffer before you enter into contract, then you're done. And you've given those documents. The rest of the disclosures are all still need to be given, but these are the ones that trigger that 5 days, automatic 5 days, no matter what the contract says.
Unless you come back with an additional disclosure regarding the TDS, then that opens it up again.
Yeah, right. Unless there's something you forgot. So it has to be thorough as well, right? Because you don't want to forget anything, because that would just start it all running over again. Yeah. Okay, if anyone else have any questions, I can stop sharing. Remind me.
I'll tell you just one point. I showed a property in Coto de Caza, and it backed up to the Cleveland National Forest. And and the problem was it was very difficult to get insurance fees, estimates, but it turned out it was an extra $10,000 a year. And so that's one thing that I always forget about, and that comes within, I guess, the inspection or the investigation period, right?
And a lot of people don't even look at that until we're way out there.
Yeah.
Right. They don't even, they don't call their insurance person and say, hey, I need you to find this until afterwards. But there are, yes, anything in a high fire area right now is probably super high insurance, given that we're in California and it's dry and windy.
That was great.
So yeah. Okay, well, if anyone else has any questions, I'm still here. I'll be here. Oh, it's already Thursday, but I'll be here tomorrow all week. Anyway, let me know. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Cindy.